Okay, hopefully by now you figured out that people in 1492 didn't think that the Earth was flat, and Columbus didn't prove that the Earth was round. Scholars in both Spain and Portugal knew that the Earth was round, and they also knew that it was way too big for Columbus to sail all the way around to China. Scholars in Europe knew that the Earth was round, and they knew the size of it because it had been measured more than 200 years before the birth of Christ. It was Eratosthenes here who had managed to measure the size of the Earth to an incredible accuracy, 240 years before the birth of Christ, and so the scholars of Europe knew that Columbus was wrong. But the King and Queen of Spain, well, they were willing to give Columbus a chance if it meant getting a leg up on the Portuguese and Venetian competition. As seen here in this picture, the King of Spain is bidding Columbus to proceed across the sea. But we need to recognize how much Columbus really changed things, not simply by, quote, discovering a new world, but he's also doing this right at the moment when Europe is changing, when the mindset, the worldview, if you will, of Europe is undergoing a transformation.
Europe at the time of Columbus is like straddling these two worlds, this pre-modern, Christian, religious-oriented perspective, and one that's looking out at the world, how can we make money off of this? How can we do that? How do we get to Asia? How do we get to southern Africa? And Christopher Columbus really captures that. We can see that in his utter religious devotion, his seeking to want to get out and convert the Indians, but at the same time he is exploring the world. He's mapping the world in ways that people hadn't thought of before. In the Middle Ages, people didn't really need realistic maps because they weren't going anywhere. They didn't need a map that showed exactly where someplace was in Africa, Timbuktu, or India, because they weren't traveling there. The only places they were going were 5 miles away from their home, or if they were merchants, they were trading over routes that had been traded over for years and centuries even. You didn't need a map of the Mediterranean because the sailors and the captains all knew where everything was. The map was in their head. Instead, we find people looking at maps like this. This is an image of the world divided into 3 parts. This kind of map is called a tripartite map. It's based on the idea of the Trinity, that God is actually 3 parts: God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And people thought that, well, if there are 3 parts to God, there are probably 3 parts to the world. There's Asia, there's Africa, and there's Europe. And so they came up with this conception where basically the earth matches God and the heavens. And on the left you can see Europe, on the top is Asia, and on the right is Africa. And at the center of them, where they come together, is Jerusalem, the holy city. The tripartite map, also known as a T and O for the shape of the T and the O, really reflect a very Middle Ages attitude, a religious attitude that Earth reflects what's in the heavens. But again, if you're trying to go to Africa, it doesn't help that you've shaped Africa like a slice of a pie. You're not going to get anywhere. So it's not a map for going anywhere. It's not really a representation of the material world, because nobody wants a representation of the material world. It's simply a reflection of religious ideas. If you're having trouble kind of visualizing what one of these maps looks like, this is the TO tripartite version put over a map of the globe as you probably know it. And you can see that the center point is in Jerusalem. T&O maps came in a variety of types. This one in Latin. And here's one turned on its side so that north is actually at the top. We still have the same shape, we've just rotated it slightly. And in some cases, these T&O maps are turned into just sort of abstractions, just sort of a beautiful image, totally unrelated to a physical world. Even realistic maps well into the 1500s, would follow the same pattern as the T and O, as this map from about 1480 shows. We can see that the Mediterranean and Western Europe and Italy look shaped pretty well, but what the heck happened to Asia and Africa? Nobody's been there, nobody knows what it actually looks like. But it's the merchants in the middle class and their increasing influence in the governments of Western Europe who are really interested in getting out, getting overseas, and exploring new territory. Why? Because there's money to be made and trading gold, ivory, sugar, spices, herbs, pepper, silks, all this stuff. The reason why Christopher Columbus is looking for a new route to China. And so with this new motive, people are going out into areas that they haven't been to before, which means they need to map them out. They need to make drawings so they can remember and tell other people where things are and how to get there. Now the world was starting to take on a much more realistic perspective, as you can see from this map. This is 1490, right before Christopher Columbus goes westward. People are starting to go eastward, and you can see that Africa is shaped a little strangely, but its west coast has a lot of detail now, all the way down to a slightly misplaced South Africa. And this is the result of the Portuguese explorations. The map, at least on the left-hand side, is really starting to look like a realistic representation of the world. The right-hand side, Europeans haven't gotten to, and they can't quite figure out where things are. This is really kind of a revolution. We have to realize that in this age of exploration, people are getting this information, and they're changing the way they think the world is shaped. And I don't mean flat or round. I mean where things are and how far apart they are. In this 1517 map, you can really see these changes multiplying. Africa has emerged as a realistic portrayal of that massive continent. Even Madagascar is tagged on there. To the left of it is South America slowly emerging, and you can see where they stopped exploring because South America stops. But you can also see Cuba and some of the Caribbean islands that Christopher Columbus had explored. And even India, even though it's still a bit misshapen and embryonic, is starting to emerge and be created as it is realistically. So what we're seeing in this map and the map before it is a real transformation, a revolution in how we see the world, going from an imagined world into a creative yet realistic representation of the world. Also keep in mind that shortly after this, right, in the 1500s, we have an emerging scientific revolution. And not only are we going to transform the way this world looks, we're going to transform where it is in the universe. With Copernicus coming along and saying, oh, the universe does not revolve around the Earth goes around the sun, is also a revolution. And of course, our view of ourselves and our world and our universe continues to change as we explore new places, low Earth orbit, the moon, and the planets. What sort of worldview are we developing now that's different from what's gone on before? What happens when you spend a lot of time on Google Earth, and what perspectives do you get?